This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH. Coming up here on this weekend's broadcast, America's renewable fuels industry, important to many farmers, awaits news from Washington. Hello, everyone. We welcome you to this weekend's broadcast. And Mr. Pearson, we're here to share the agriculture story, and that includes a look toward Washington as folks await more direction about the policy.
Indeed, Max, ethanol has been in the political spotlight, especially since the price of gasoline skyrocketed higher back when Russia invaded Ukraine. And this past week, we saw Growth Energy have a Biofuels Summit in Washington, D.C. to celebrate the end of that summer driving season. Emily Score, CEO of Growth Energy, joins us now. And Emily, it had been a while since ethanol advocates were back in D.C.
You're right. We have not had our industry have a physical presence of all of our members in D.C. since before COVID, back in 2019. So this was a long time in coming. We met with over 150 congressional offices across 28 states. All parties were very happy to be back in person, to be talking about and celebrating the successes that we've had and some of the wind we have at our backs, and also importantly, talking through the work that we still have yet to do this year and after the midterms.
Well, let's talk about some of the successes we've had this past year. Ethanol really moved into the political spotlight. Emily, what were some of the wins?
Well, I think first and foremost, what people started to recognize, policymakers on the left and the right, was the importance of ethanol in terms of our national energy security and keeping prices low at the pump. You had consumers this summer saving up to $1 a gallon on E15. And so what was great was to see President Biden and his administration recognize the fuel savings with E15 and apply an emergency waiver so E15 could be available throughout the summer nationwide. That was really important. We also had some blending obligations finalized for 2022, the highest ever fuel blending requirement for biofuels and ethanol out of this administration. We also had some wins in the Inflation Reduction Act, important tax incentives that will allow us to continue to innovate and drive down the carbon intensity of our low-cost fuel.
Emily, I want to talk first with that emergency waiver. Getting that E15 into drivers' tanks this summer certainly helped a lot of folks' personal bottom lines, but it goes away next year. Is there the opportunity to get E15 year-round legally?
Well, there is the opportunity, and we have to have E15 available nationwide. We need it to achieve our climate goals and certainly for continued affordability of the fuel. So there is, bills have been introduced in Congress. Congress can take action. We're also working with EPA to explore what options they have available to them. In the meantime, 8 states from the Midwest, the governors have said to the agency, we're going to opt out of your waiver program so we have fuel parity. And those governors are going to guarantee that their drivers in their states have access to the fuel next year.
Is there the possibility that could spread to other states if it's successful in those 8 first?
Absolutely. It's the kind of thing that's going to catch fire. And so you're already seeing there are additional governors who are weighing that. And if we continue to have this conversation on fuel prices, I think that's going to be very top of mind for additional governors, especially in states that are surrounded by other states who are offering this better low carbon, low cost fuel to their drivers next summer.
Absolutely. Emily, you've mentioned, one of the challenges we've seen are delays coming from the EPA with regard to benchmarks for the ethanol industry. Michael Regan spoke at the Biofuels Summit. What was his take? How does the EPA view the ethanol industry in 2022?
Well, it was great for him to address my members directly and in person, and he really echoed comments the president made at an Iowa ethanol plant this spring when the president was announcing the E15 waiver. The president said that we cannot achieve our climate goals of net zero 2050 without biofuels. The administrator echoed that. He reflected on the 2022 blending requirements, and that demonstrating this administration's commitment to get the renewable fuel standard back into a position of growth and driving growth. And he really reflected on the continued role that biofuels are going to play in terms of supporting our rural economy, affordable fuel choices, and advancing the climate agenda. So assuring words from the administrator as we are heading into the rulemaking process this fall.
That's the thing. The rulemaking is where we see those delays, those renewable volume obligations, the blending requirements. Emily, oftentimes those are way delayed from EPA. Is there the potential that they could become more timely down the line?
Well, Growth Energy sued EPA to make sure that they were held accountable to their timetable. As a result, we've entered into a consent decree. So it's a legally binding timetable. EPA has committed they will get the proposed blending obligations out by November, mid-November, and the final obligations out next June. So not as soon as we'd like, a delay, but I do really have confidence that with this court binding deadline, they are going to meet the deadline.
Emily, is Growth Energy going to be prepared to get on the ground when we get all the new Congress people in post-election and educate them on the benefits of ethanol?
Absolutely. We do that every 2 years. And so we are watching some of the key races very carefully. We, of course, support those who support us. And so a big part of what we'll be doing in January, when you have some freshmen coming in, is educating them, making sure that they're up to speed. And that's not just within the Corn Belt, but throughout the country, on the role that ethanol can play in advancing our climate agenda and bringing affordable clean fuel options to today's vehicles.
That's what it's all about, folks. That's Emily Score, CEO of Growth Energy. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. The Firestone Ag Dealer Network offers you the support, inventory, and resources you need. Visit firestoneag.com to find your local certified dealer. And now it's time to talk markets. Joining us this week is Walter Kunisch. He's a Senior Vice President and Commodities Market Strategist at HTS Commodities. Walter, thanks for joining us.
Morning. Thanks for having me.
Let's talk first the big news this past week. Federal Reserve raising interest rates, 75 basis point hike. Walter, how does that change money flow around the commodity sector?
Well, good morning. And that's a great question. And when we look at the 75 basis point rise that the Federal Reserve made yesterday, Chairman Jay Powell also made public his commitment toward raising rates toward, to control inflation. When we look at the commodity space, when we're looking at whether it's the cattle curves, the corn curves, wheat, soybean, futures curves, we look at total open interest or total participation. Some of those curves, corn and soybeans in particular, total open interest has been at a 10-year low or close to 10-year lows. So when we look ahead right now, we're at HTS, we're kind of wondering right now, how does the Fed decision, raising interest rates, perhaps where there's more attractive yields or return in other assets, we're continuing to question, is there really, while there is a fundamental story in some of these commodities, does the speculative money have to make the investments inside of agricultural futures? So it's a variable that we're closely watching, and because we know it impacts both volatility as well as prices.
Well, let's talk about those prices in the corn market in particular. Walter, as you think about where we could go heading into harvest, which direction do you see corn most likely to move?
That's a good question. And it's a very complex question right now. I think while we're reluctant to put any sort of price target around our corn right now, given the fundamental structure of corn, it's very conceivable that the curve can remain very volatile. So when we're looking at the fundamental construct of U.S. corn, we do see a couple things. First of all, we see a bullish story developing on the supply front. Yields in the western corn belt from Texas up to Nebraska, a little bit over into South Dakota, down to Iowa have been vulnerable. USDA's NASS has reduced corn yields from August to September. And in some of those states, Iowa, South Dakota, Nebraska, down into Texas, those yields were dropped by about 5 bushels per acre from August to September. So there's the bullish story. But at the same time, there are headwinds for U.S. corn, whether that's a strong dollar. We're still seeing a reducing demand in the U.S., reduced gasoline usage following the destruction of demand, reduced demand rather after the Federal Reserve's increase is lowering ethanol demand. Livestock numbers are lower. So while at the same time we have a bullish supply story, there are some headwinds for demand. So we see a pretty volatile environment for corn looking forward.
Walter, as you look out, getting through fourth quarter 2022, corn exports have been a topic of hot conversation. We've now got export sales reports back from USDA. Do you think the export market will stay strong heading into this winter?
You're talking about one of my favorite topics, corn and feed grain exports. And it's a very dynamic topic right now and a very sensitive one. What's interesting is we look out over the next 3 to 6 months, we do see headwinds for U.S. corn exports. Let's take a look back for a second to look forward. After Russia invaded Ukraine, a lot of analysts at either on the private sector or in NGOs thought that reduced Ukrainian corn participation in the global export markets would result in major U.S. business. That didn't happen. And it didn't happen because of two things. A, because of the strong dollar, and B, kind of overproduction, if you will, or accommodating production of corn in the southern hemisphere countries like Argentina and Brazil. So looking right now, heading into the 2023 marketing year, 22-23 marketing year, that started on the September 1st, U.S. corn export sales were down about 50% year over year. So again, when we're looking ahead right now, yes, we know that Argentina and Brazil ending stocks are at the bottom of the 10-year ranges, but given that strong dollar, given the feed grain demand, we do see those challenging environments ahead.
All right, we'll be back for more market conversation with Walter Kunisch of HTS Commodities. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone Ag. Harvey Firestone invented the first pneumatic farm tire, forever changing what it means to farm hard. Visit firestoneag.com to learn more about this history and tire solutions for today. This week, we're discussing markets with Walter Kunisch. He's a Senior Vice President and Commodities Market Strategist at HTS Commodities. And Walter, we saw the war in Ukraine heat up this week with President Vladimir Putin's speech. What does that do to the wheat market in the weeks ahead?
Schizophrenia is the best word. We've seen wheat go up, we've seen wheat go down. And with the recent comments by Vladimir Putin committing, his desire to commit another 300,000, troops toward Ukraine, help definitely put a floor and kind of light a fire underneath the wheat complex. And, we really believe that the wheat complex, particular hard wheat, has been looking for an upside catalyst. We at HTS, we talk to our commercial clients, we're talking to our farm level producer clients, and we're seeing kind of a lack of volatility in wheat. And really that's because U.S. wheat, while certainly the hard wheat carryout has been at a sharply reduced year over year, it's at the bottom of the 15-year range, and it's been searching for a function. Traditionally, U.S. wheat, hard wheat, has been a storable commodity, but now with this kind of with this unfortunate incident again stemming from Ukraine, it looks like the world community could be once again expressing some of their risk concerns back into the U.S. markets. If U.S. wheat, whether it's soft wheat or hard wheat, wins business, that has remained to be seen.
All right. Well, the other big export story, Walter, has been soybeans. Questions about whether or not China has secured their needs heading into this winter. What's your take? Will export demand from Asia continue for American beans?
We hope so, and it's a variable or a part of the soybean trade that we're following very closely. What's interesting is that Chinese participation in terms of their total soybean import needs should be a little softer in the 22-23 marketing year compared to the 21-22 marketing year. But what we're seeing again is that U.S. beans right now are uncompetitive against Brazil and Argentina. Argentina just to relax some of its currency controls on the soybean producers, and what we saw was aggressive buying from China out of Latin America. And we're seeing a similar story too. While yes, Chinese participation inside the U.S. soybean market has been active, it hasn't been active to the same years in the past. And given that there's a strong U.S. dollar, we're still seeing right now Chinese buying directed more toward the southern hemisphere than the U.S.
Walter, while we've got you, I want to get your thoughts here on the cotton market. It has had an incredibly volatile year. Harvest is coming on. Drought has an impact. Where do you see cotton going?
Cotton is a favorite commodity of ours at Hilltop right now. Whether we're talking with our producer and clients, we've been out in the fields. And when we look at West Texas, we see one word, dry, and the other word we see is barren. And when we see dry and barren, we really sit back and question, how did USDA's NASS find more acres? How did USDA's NASS increase production in U.S. cotton, in particular West Texas cotton? While we believe USDA adopted FAS acres, and certainly maybe there can be more some more cotton at harvest time, ultimately we believe that maybe these production numbers in the U.S. are a little bit overstated in Western Texas. So we're a little more constructive on our cotton outlook.
Walter, a few seconds left before we let you go. The cattle market, do you see strength coming into that market here later this fall?
We do, and I think that we see cattle as being a potential tinderbox. Any rain that kind of enters from Texas up into Nebraska, we believe that cow-calf producers and your background operators will have an incentive to withhold heifers. Heifer retention should translate to higher feeder prices. higher feeder prices, higher live prices, higher beef prices.
It's Walter Kunisch, Senior Vice President, Commodities Market Strategist at HTS Commodities.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability. Well, Chad Colby's out there indeed, checking out the technology at harvest time. He's out there in the cab as he joins us this weekend.
Our technology segment comes from my favorite spot, inside the combine cab. I'm on the farm at the Wade Farms, just south of Bloomington, Illinois. They just got into harvest here, about 20% done of their corn harvest. Jacob, talk a little bit about corn here in central Illinois. How's it going so far?
So things are going as expected. We're just below 30% moisture now. We had some winds earlier in the year, and so right now we're going at an angle on some elbowed corn, and we're just kind of addressing all of our problem fields first and getting the potential down corn out.
You know, Jacob, when you go to narrow row corn, the challenge has always been that technology. We got to plant it, you got to manage it with sprayers and so forth, and of course you got to harvest it. It seems like you're getting these things figured out more and more every year. I see your dad in the field here as well with another machine like this. How's the technology working for you?
Yeah, so the technology on this, it's got a dual gathering chain corn head, which it's the only one on the market that has that, and it really allows it to bring in a lot of material without any trouble. And we also have row guidance on this, so when we are driving with the row, we don't have to steer it. But right now we can just drive with RTK and on a heading. So,
you know, Jacob, I noticed driving over here, looked to me like it's not going to be too long. You're going to be cutting some soybeans as well.
Yeah, so I think we'll get into soybeans tomorrow or maybe even the next day. Some 3-1 maturity soybeans that had a good rain event come through and knocked all the leaves off the other day, and green pods have pretty much disappeared.
Well, that's a good thing. Jacob, I don't know if you noticed or not, but I've got my new Apple Watch on here, which is pretty nice. And I'm surprised you haven't given me any grief because I don't have the new phone yet.
I was kind of wondering when the new phone would come out.
To be honest with you, Jacob, it's in my car waiting. The other thing I'm wondering, hey, Max Armstrong, did you actually get a new phone yet?
No, Chad, I don't have my new iPhone yet. Somehow I knew, Mike, that he would have his, and somehow I knew that he would have his before I would have mine. I don't have to be in as much hurry to get a new iPhone as Chad Colby does. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. Well, it's just a little more than a month away, that annual convention of the FFA organization. And our old friend Tom Brand, Executive Director of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting, has been involved in the FFA convention for years. First as a student and then as a volunteer. It's great to see you, sir. How have you been?
I'm great. Thanks for the opportunity to be on board this week, Max.
What's your role that you play every year at the FFA convention when you devote your time there?
You know, back in 1990, I had the opportunity to be an intern in the FFA newsroom. A lot of folks don't realize that there's a newsroom behind the scenes at FFA convention that's covering the different award winners, speakers that are on stage, things that are going on with sponsors, just a big variety of different things. And so I was fortunate to be an intern as a student at the University of Missouri. I've continued that experience every year since then, working in the newsroom, going on from intern to end up being a farm broadcaster and liaison with NAFB members to those student interns at convention. So this will be my 33rd FFA convention, if you include the virtual one in 2020. That I've been involved with the newsroom, and my 37th convention out of the last 38 years.
Oh my goodness. You need some kind of a plaque for that, pal, for sure.
Well, I think there's probably some calluses on my feet from the amount of steps that I put in during that week in Kansas City or Louisville or now in Indianapolis.
What has been the enjoyment or satisfaction that you've derived from being there with those young people and seeing what often becomes a life-changing event for them as they are motivated and inspired during that time at the FFA convention?
You know, that's the thing about FFA convention. It really is an energizer for those students that come every year. but I would say it's also an energizer for me. Yes, the work can be exhausting because it gets to be such long days, but just seeing how a young person develops during that week of FFA convention, just some of the skills that they learn, really the chance to identify that they've got the ability to do some of those things that they may not have realized. I've worked with students that have been in broadcast for a number of years. I've worked with students I've had to teach, here's how you turn on a recorder and here's how you go about doing an interview. Each one of those has been a wonderful experience. What I've noticed in more recent years is that the students that are involved in those internship positions during FFA convention are also lots of times student members of NAFB. So it gives a great opportunity to connect them with the association in a way outside of any of our regular activities we do throughout the year. And keep in touch with them. So many of them are Facebook friends today. I look back at just the different people and how we've continued to cross paths years and years later.
So many times through the years, I've heard young people say that this was a life-changing event for me, or even as a young adult later on after the FFA convention, they said, this made a difference in my life, turned me around. It set some sights out there for me to try to achieve.
You know, I think about my FFA experience whenever I was in high school and just the different seeds that were planted for me and the difference it made in making some changes, making some directional paths in my life. I know if you get a chance to sit down and listen to any of those speakers on the convention stage, whether they're the guest speakers or one of those national officers, there's always some sort of inspiration you can take home. And the energy that's on that convention floor. Lots of times I don't get to see all the sessions that take place at national convention. But one of the things I make it a point to do is step down on the floor when opening ceremonies are taking place and just feel the energy that's amongst all those young people that are gathered there.
After the TV cameras were brought in many years ago, people back home, the school administrators, the school board members, other teachers realized, wait a minute, this is not a junket. This is not just a vacation. This is a tremendous learning experience for the young people. Shifting gears a little bit, we have our meeting of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting coming up in November. I suppose plans are well underway for that?
We've got a great lineup for our newsmaker sessions, professional improvement sessions, and then really the centerpiece of our convention is what we call Trade Talk. It's when agriculture companies and organizations and associations come in, they set up a booth, farm broadcasters go around, they do interviews with those different representatives. Some of those air right live during the time of the convention taking place. Others will be recorded and used for the following weeks to come. And not only is it a news gathering opportunity, but it's a news making opportunity too. So many of those that are displaying there use our convention as really the time frame to tell about some new things that are going on with them.
It really becomes a destination for the organizations, does it not, the various farm groups?
It does, yeah. We'll have about 100 exhibitors that'll be a part of our Trade Talk event. Overall attendance typically ranges around 600 to 650. Sometimes as many as 700 will end up joining us at the Western Crown Center in Kansas City. We've called the Westin home since the early part of the 1970s and have held our convention in Kansas City since the mid-1960s. So a lot of rich traditions that come along with that. Some of those date back to the fact that FFA was in Kansas City whenever we moved that convention to Kansas City. The American Royal was also taking place. So farm broadcasters initially used that as an opportunity to connect with other things that were going on in agriculture. Now we're a standalone event, one of the largest gatherings of agriculture communicators throughout the year.
There's a great camaraderie there, to be sure, and we look forward to getting together with fellow members of the NAFB and seeing you there in not too many weeks, sir.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to having you and This Week in Agribusiness along board too.
Appreciate it. Tom Brand is the Executive Director of the National Association of Farm Broadcasting, of which we are proud to say we are a member, recognized as a Hall of Fame member of NAFB as well. We appreciate that. There's more coming up here. Stay with us. This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Case IH.
Thanks for joining us here for This Week in Agribusiness. Max, this time of year, farmers are taking a look at their fields as those combines roll through. And if they want a clean field at harvest, they got to manage those weeds all year, don't they?
It's become more of a daunting task, to be sure. And that's why some farmers have had to switch, actually falling back to previous methods. We visited about that at our Plant Smart, Grow Smart visit the other day with Mark Storr, who is with BASF. As young men, we spend a lot of time walking fields and out there physically, mechanically controlling weeds and using cultivators. We've kind of regressed a little bit in recent years. We've seen cultivators pulled out of sheds.
That was my first paying job, was pulling weeds. I'll probably retire pulling weeds too. And I've often said, with the guidance systems that we have, cultivating used to be a bigger chore than what it is today, but it's all become a necessity because of our reliance on herbicides and getting away from some of those other weed management strategies. And anything we can do to manage the mechanisms of action that we have today by rotating those modes of action, using the products that have relatively clean bills of health, if you will.
I gather you have no tolerance for weeds. It's a zero tolerance approach you'd love to see the grower take.
Yeah, it's really where we're at. The thing when it comes to weed control, we have to look at it as a preventative thing as opposed to a curative, because the curatives are really what costs us the money when we're not able to successfully control those weeds post-emerge anymore, or at least exclusively post-emerge. And if you're not willing to, go the extra mile and really put together a program for those weeds, you're probably going to struggle years down the road because they're going to continue to flourish.
The 1-2 punch could really make a difference, can it not, in weed control?
Absolutely. That 1-2 punch of a pre followed by a post, adding residual herbicide to that post-emerge application is really the only methods that we're seeing successfully employed on the toughest weeds we're facing. And we tell farmers how important it is to plant early to get that yield advantage by getting that seed in the ground and off to an early development. But we slam it in the ground so fast, sometimes we forget about taking care of those weeds with a pre-emerge herbicide. And those are the really problem fields for us. So in the case of soybeans, with our pre-emerge chemistry, we have Zidua Pro, which would be our premium brand. Zidua, of course, lends itself to great residual activity in soybeans and corn. And then also products like Verdict, which is an excellent foundation. So they all work great in giving us that first punch of that 1-2 punch that we're looking for.
Will you be out with growers taking a look at fields during harvest?
I get a chance to ride combines sometimes. It is the best time to be evaluating this year's program to see how you finished. Thankfully, we've got enough people with a work ethic and doing a great job over the years. The weed pressure that a lot of folks face, they've got it beat down to where it's manageable. We're going to have some pockets that probably grow the best crops they've ever had.
We appreciated the visit with Mark Storr, talking about weed control and the importance of it. You can see more of our series at PlantSmartGrowSmart.com. Greg Solier now brings us his farm weather forecast for the week ahead, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. The change of the season is always a big deal to our agriculture meteorologist. I bet you stayed up late the other night, right, to see fall arrive?
Equinox, what are you going to do? You'll let it in, right?
Oh, no.
Sorry about that. I just get to do that twice a year, so.
Yeah, well, that's enough.
Yeah, I know, just about. In any event, if you're looking for the continuation of longer lasting fall weather, as in a chill in the air, well, maybe along the divide in points out of the east here we'll have it. We've had a little bit of patchy frost and freeze into the northern reaches of Montana, the Dakota, southern Canadian prairie, nothing unusual for the time of year. And prior to that, nice to see some recent rainfall in some still drought areas of Montana. Meanwhile, the warmth continues on. The back 40 towards maturity. Harvest continues on in the Pacific Northwest. Very little going on. Action-packed weather, if you will. Maybe a couple of snowflakes into the higher peaks of the Canadian and U.S. Rockies. Later on into the week now, the weather systems are coming to a halt, at least their eastward advance across the nation. Why? We'll get to that in just a second, but the heat builds into Big Sky again. The western Dakotas, Nebraska, and again, better maturity and harvest operations continuing on. Yeah, dryness and drought as well. The story of just one lone leftover, perhaps renegade shower into Washington State, and that is it. Warm, dry weather continues on into the valleys of California. Over with as well, probably for the season, the monsoon setup over the southwestern states. We've had a pretty robust one here this season. Note the heat back into triple-digit ranges, valleys of California, the warmth in the desert southwest, back to more seasonal temperatures and humidity levels out of the central and southern plains, a little nip in the air from the Nebraska Panhandle on northward. The warmth builds back to the north. The jet stream winds in from the west and southwest. There's upper level high pressure over the western half of the country. Some of the heat in the desert southwest, all quiet except for hot weather into the valleys of California. So really nothing going on, Max, roughly from the high plains on westward to the east, a different story.
Many of us will start to see a little more of those yellow splotches in the trees. Not much color yet, though.
No, a little early in this season. And of course, the amount of rainfall, soil moisture, also a determining factor on the fall colors. And they'll certainly continue to feel like fall as it ought to be through the upper Midwest, Great Lakes region. Some instability, sprinkles and showers off the Great Lakes region, but largely dry weather from the Mississippi on westward. A little cool as we wind on through the waning days of September. It's going to feel like August, perhaps, with time across the Plain States areas. 80s, perhaps some low to mid 90s. That hot ridge is back into play, and the warmth into the western Corn Belt. Still plenty of dry time for outdoor work and early harvest and or prepping for the same into the eastern Corn Belt. Back into the southern plains, more rain is certainly and would be appreciated for the newly sown winter wheat fields of the central and southern plains. Some warmth over the desert southwest. Otherwise cooler, drier, far more comfortable weather and dry time, except for the Gulf Coast area. Here's the leading edge of that cold front that made its way through the eastern half of the country. We do get some tropical development as the mid to late portions of the week wears on over the central Gulf. Tropical rains and more so to the east and southeast on that disturbance and weather. So Max, things getting ramped up as expected late, nonetheless, across the Gulf and the Atlantic basin.
And I think there's a progression of those still coming, right?
Yeah.
A few more behind this one.
Exactly. Watch these little disturbances coming off the African coast, and 30, 50, 60% likelihood here in the coming days that 3 or 4 of these things are going to form up and moved into a named category. So very interesting weather. In any event, look at the cold fronts still on the move over the eastern Corn Belt. Tropical rains from Fiona into the northeast to New England early in the week. Later in the week, cold front moves on by. Dry time expected for much of the Corn Belt as warmth moves in back west of the Missouri River. Tropical rains are still underway across Florida. Cooler air for the Tennessee Valley. Outdoor work and harvest operations will come to a halt. Monitor a named system out of the eastern Gulf with time moving to the north and northeast. It's going to be a tough go down here. More storms across the Atlantic. Hot weather builds back into the southern plains.
Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country, presented by Pivot BioProven 40. Predictable, productive, weatherproof. Turn to a better nitrogen. Turn to Pivot BioProven 40. Learn more at pivotbio.com. I believe the quote from the meteorologist was, "Very interesting weather." You meant that, didn't you?
Absolutely. So it's not winter time, so we know it's not a winter storm, but you know we get into this time of the year, the tropics, and they've been cooking, they've been percolating out there, and at least up till now, upper level winds or Saharan dust or whatever you want to call it have not been favorable. It is a favorable setup now going forward, probably a later arriving protracted tropical storm season. This will be a category of some sort over the eastern Gulf. Look at these numbers here, 5 to 10, 20 plus, particularly in through Georgia and Florida. It's a determining factor, this track here, probably east of the Mississippi, and then a swing with time to the north and northeast. Problem, there's 3 or 4 more of these things still stacked out across the tropical waters of the Atlantic, so it's a busy scenario. Tropical rains, this is leftover remnants from Fiona, so yeah, lots of rough weather, active weather over the eastern third of the country. Spotty moisture for the Great Lakes, little or none back west of the Missouri, maybe up to a 1/4 inch in the Pacific Northwest. Otherwise, it's quiet quiet as you get west of the Mississippi.
My. Well, let's look at the week of October 3rd, that first full week of October. How much warmth will we have?
There is plenty of it, more or less like August, maybe to early September here, with probably still capable of pushing close to 90. That would be maybe some record approaching territory for parts of the northern plains. And really from the central and western Corn Belt on westward, we're in great shape with outdoor work, at least from a harvest standpoint. Below average over the eastern and southern parts of the country. Here's the reason. Probably some development here, another tract name system here, and the remnants of another feature up across the areas of the northeast of New England. Remember, north and west of these storm tracks, the weather systems come to a screeching halt, hence this wide area of favorable outdoor work and harvest weather. Canadian Prairie, much of the Corn Belt into the Pacific Northwest, maybe a little moisture into parts of Northern California.
Will all of that stuff be out of there by the week of October 10th?
Not quite late in arriving, but these are very warm waters across the Atlantic. Actually, the latitude about 40 degrees north. We've seen already two systems strengthen as they move north of that line, roughly a beam right here across the Atlantic, though. That's kind of unusual, indicator that those warm waters are farther north than they typically are for the time of year. Cool across the eastern part of the country. Here's the hot ridge, still parked across the northern and central plains. Not much movement to the weather system, so the tropics are busy. Gulf Coast, one system still coming into the western Atlantic, one winding down over the northeast of New England. Lots of dry weather back into play and harvest opportunities for the heartland.
That week of October 17th, I believe that's the week of the Sun Belt Expo, the farm show at Moultrie, Georgia.
Interesting. We'll see what happens from the tropics. With that in mind, look at the warmth across the country. A late season heat wave for much of the Corn Belt, the plains west to east, a little below average Gulf Coast area. We might get one more system off the Pacific into West Texas and another one approaching wet weather from about Moultrie on southward.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
When you see Jason Dufour's Cub Lowboy tractor, you look at it from the front end, it almost looks ordinary. It is not ordinary, I assure you. Max's Tractor Shed is brought to you by Store-Lock Tool Cabinets. They aren't ordinary either. When you compare them to that other stuff out there, the stuff that wiggles around, it's flimsy, the doors and drawers don't fit well, you realize there's great quality in a Store-Lock Tool Cabinet. Check them out at StoreLock.com. Well, Jason Dufour's Lowboy, International Cub Lowboy, was made in 1965, but it's had a lot of changes made to it for sure. Take a look here at this tractor. It's changed to allow him to slide from his wheelchair onto the seat of that tractor. Jared and Doug Erbaugh did some refitting of this tractor. The platform folds away there at the bottom where Jason can put his legs in place there. The steering wheel folds away also. It has a hand clutch, a hand brake. The throttle assembly is under the fuel tank. They had to relocate the battery box. The Erbaugh boys did a tremendous job on Jason Dufour's 1965 Cub Lowboy tractor from International Harvester. Well, there'll be some pretty typical tractors, but some very special ones moving across the block, tractors and other things at the big iron auction in the week ahead. Let's see what's coming up.
While Max, the machinery market is still very active, the September 28th auction features 2,583 items. John G. Price Jr. and Shirley J. Price Revocable Trust will sell a 2013 Versatile 2375 four-wheel drive tractor. This machine has 2,016 hours. They have a John Deere 9550 combine, a 1986 John Deere 4650 tractor, a 2009 John Deere 7430 mechanical front tractor with a loader. Their quality equipment is located in Roswell, Kansas. Richard Gordy is retiring from Argyle, Wisconsin. They have 117 quality pieces. There's an AgChem Rogator 854, an AgChem Terragator 1803. There's a Caterpillar 963B track loader, and the Robert Larson Estate in Blair, Nebraska will sell a Grove boom lift and a Caterpillar 950 wheel loader. Tommy and Valerie Cartwright Farms, they are retiring from Sunray, Texas. They have 151 items, including a John Deere 8320R mechanical front tractor and a Case IH 7240 mechanical front tractor. 310 sellers from 26 states will sell equipment on September 28th. As always, Max, the equipment is represented by the sellers, so go to bigiron.com for all the information.
All across the country, schools are back in session, and FFA is working to build the next generation of ag leaders. This week, we're meeting Hannah Somm. She is the Ohio State FFA Vice President. Hannah, you're a senior at Amanda Clear Creek High School. You've been involved in FFA all 4 years. What prompted you to get involved that first time?
Truly, there was never a point where I didn't want to be an FFA. It's a pretty big thing at our school. We have an entire hallway dedicated to it, lined with banners and signs and posters. But it was probably my older brother when he joined FFA 2 years before me. I remember when he learned the creed, I also learned the creed to prove that I could. And that I knew that that would be a contest that I wanted to compete in. So it's always been something that I wanted to do. But seeing my older brother do it, I knew that it was definitely something for me.
Now, Amanda Clear Creek, you mentioned a lot of passion for their FFA program. How many members do you have?
We have over 160 members, which is more than a quarter of our high school. So we are definitely a pretty big program, and we're very proud of that.
That is very cool. And now, of course, you're heading to the state level as the vice president. Hannah, what are you excited about this next year?
The thing that I'm most excited about is definitely to meet with our members. I ran for state office because I have a passion for agriculture, but I have a passion for sharing my passion. Getting to travel across the state, meeting members, hearing their stories is always something that I look forward to. And I just love that one-on-one interaction and hearing how FFA has impacted their life, like how it's impacted mine.
How has FFA impacted yours, Hannah? What were some of the projects you worked on in high school?
Well, the biggest project that I worked on in high school was at my family farm. We actually have a Christmas tree operation. So throughout the winter months, I can always be found somewhere close to the Christmas trees. And then also working with my market goats that I raise for my county fair every year. And in addition to that, just bringing awareness to agriculture on all levels. Going into FFA, I knew a lot about agriculture and its impacts, but I got to learn even more about that and really deepen my passion and how much I wanted to advocate for our industry and all that we have to offer.
Hannah, you're heading into your senior year. As you look out, do you want to stay involved in agriculture?
The goal is definitely to stay involved in agriculture. I'm not entirely sure on what level yet, but I always want to live on my family farm. I appreciated the opportunity of getting to grow up around agriculture and how much that shaped my life. So I want to make sure that I always have that opportunity for the rest of my life as well.
Well, we wish you the best of luck. Hannah Somm, thank you so much for talking with us here today.
Thank you for having me.
Harvest might be in the air for a lot of growers, but Max, not everybody's in the combine yet. Some farmers are still making their way to farm shows.
They had their big show in Ohio this week, to be sure. Ty Higgins is here to talk with us about the fact that the Ohio Farm Science Review took place this past week. I'm sure you were there. You're there every hour, every day almost, most years.
Yeah, and this year, boy, it was nice to have all 3 days of Farm Science Review. You might recall last year we got rained out on Wednesday. We got 4 to 5 inches of rain there at the grounds overnight and just washed everything out and couldn't have a show on that middle part of the week. But this week, the weather was beautiful, sunny, and about 80 degrees, 80 to 85 degrees all week long, and a great week to get our members at Ohio Farm Bureau and farmers all across the state there to see new technology, new innovations, and new ideas.
I would imagine your president spent some time out there, and probably some of the other board members.
Yeah, a lot of leaders at Farm Science Review visiting with farmers all across the state about issues that we're seeing in agriculture, like inflation, supply chain. Of course, we have a farm bill beginning to be talked about in Washington, D.C., and we talked about it at Farm Science Review. In fact, our team put together a survey for livestock producers, row crop, specialty crop, dairy farmers, because the farm bill means something different to every one of those aspects of agriculture. We wanted to find out from our members, being a grassroots organization, just what's important to them to be in the farm bill, because we started having roundtable talks with our senators just over the last couple of weeks, and as we get into 2023, those talks will of course start to ramp up, and we're going to hopefully get some new farm law in by the end of next year. And so we want our farm members and agriculture across Ohio to have a voice, since they have a huge stake in what happens in that farm bill.
You have a very diverse state, of course, Ty. The big cities are there, but a lot of important rural areas in between. The policy has to be rather diverse too, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think that's really important, and it's what makes Ohio unique, is the fact that we do have the Columbuses, the Cleveland, Cincinnatis, Akron, Toledo, Youngstown, all those metropolitan areas, but just outside of those metro areas is agriculture. You don't have to go very far to find out where your food comes from here in Ohio. And we're so diverse. Corn and soybeans and wheat, of course, dairy important, beef, pork, but we even grow tomatoes, peppers, all types of fruits and vegetables. Our grape industry is growing. We're so diverse, and that's what makes the Farm Bill so important for all farmers, no matter what your background here is in the Buckeye State.
The president of The Ohio State University was there too, I believe.
Yeah, a big announcement between Ohio State and Nationwide. $2 million to start the Ag Innovation Hub. And this is really important. They mentioned the changing climate quite a bit as they unveiled this new Ag Innovation Hub. They want to make sure that as the climate changes, that farmers are on the top of how to keep growing the food we need for consumers across the country and literally across the globe. And so this is a way to put researchers at Ohio State in closer and more direct contact with not just agriculturalists, but also business owners across Ohio to get those ideas coming from Ohio State to the private and public sector more quickly to make sure the food and that food supply system contains its maximum capacity that we've seen. Even through the height of a pandemic, agriculture didn't stop, but there are more challenges out there that farmers need to be aware of and that researchers are working on daily.
I'm looking over the hats in the background. I don't see any Ohio State University cap back there.
Well, there are a couple outside of the picture, but you might notice the OHIO and then the Buckeye helmet in the back. So at least I got some sort of headgear back there. Of course, I'm going to represent my Buckeyes in every way, shape, or form I can.
I'm sure you will. Ty, thank you. We appreciate it so much.
Thank you, Max.
Take care. You know, Mike, they may revoke his alumni membership if he doesn't show more red in the background. We always appreciate visiting with Ty.
They just might, Max. That is a passionate student body there at The Ohio State University.
I've never seen that guy when he didn't have red on.
Well, Max, you know, we're coming to the end of this week, and it's also the end of Farm Safety Week, which I know is an issue important to you.
We need to underscore it every year, every week of the year, too, as a matter of fact, because there are so many dangers in the workplace. But I think it's the highway travel that worries me as we come into the harvest season.
That's right. A lot of big equipment moving a little slower than those cars out there on the roads. A good reminder to be safe.
So keep that in mind. If you're out there headed toward a pumpkin patch or an apple orchard or a football game through the rural areas, watch out for the slow-moving equipment. We'll be here again next weekend. We hope you'll join us then for This Week in Agribusiness. Have a great week. So long, everyone. Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Case IH. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by Omax Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.